We are live now, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jacob Shu, and I have the distinct honor of being chair of the Apprenticeship 2030 Commission. It's a privilege of a lifetime for me to be serving alongside so many esteemed commission members who are leaders across industry. We got education, labor, and of course, government represented here. I come to this commission from the private industry. I've spent nearly 30 years building technology workforces around the world, and in recent years, building technology and IT apprenticeships right here in the United States from Baltimore. I've seen how work changes lives and transforms communities. I've seen and hired people, tens of thousands of people who have predictably gone from often poverty or below poverty to prosperity because they were given meaningful career opportunities and were supported by systems that enabled and empowered those journeys. And we can do that right here and right now. And so today I'd like to start by first reviewing the law. And this is a good time to also emphasize that the commission is going to be focused on how. The what has already largely been spelled out in the law. And so we want to focus on how, right? And today we're going to be hearing from the Department of Labor on the current state of registered apprenticeship systems in Maryland. We're going to be hearing from Department of Education on apprenticeship programs and the blueprint for Maryland's future, as well as Dr. Robert Lehrman is going to be sharing with us best practices that he's seen from around the world. I just want to emphasize that we're going to be moving with boldness and urgency to focus on that how. How do we enable and power up pathways to meaningful work? How do we ensure people from all walks of life have opportunities for meaningful careers that are going to provide family advancing wages and also incomes that grow as they advance their professional development? And ultimately, how do we close the skills gap, the experience gap, and those opportunity gaps so that Maryland can be a model for the entire country? And so we have a lot of ground to cover in this first meeting. Today, we're going to leave some Q&A time open after each presentation. You can type your questions in the chat, and we have a number of staffers here who can answer them. And all questions will be responded to. And if we don't address them in the Q&A sessions, we'll compile an FAQ that we can share with the group as well. And with that, let me turn this over to David Smolsky, who can actually start us off by providing an overview of the legislative charge. David, over to you. David, you're on mute.
That's a good way to start the meeting. My name is David Smolsky, and I'm staff to the Department of Legislative Services, and I'm also staff to this 2030 Commission. And normally we begin these meetings with an overview of why you're here. And that would be Chapter 168 of the most recent legislative session. The law itself is attached by a link to the website, which appears on on the Maryland General Assembly website for the commission. So if you want to read it there, or you can also just type in Chapter 168 and read the law for your own benefit. The bill came in and did two things. The policy end of things was it made a diversity change to the makeup of the Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Council. But for your purposes, it also had uncodified language in the back that established the Apprenticeship 2030 Commission. The purpose of this commission is to examine and make recommendations to reduce skills shortages in high demand occupations. It's also there to provide affordable training and career pathways for young people to get into fields where apprenticeship may be appropriate. The purpose also is to expand the number of registered apprenticeships in the industry sectors where there are skill shortages, grow the number of registered apprenticeships to at least 60,000 by 2030, and reach the blueprint goal, which is the current commission, of 45% of high school graduates completing high school level registered apprenticeships. The commission is to focus on registered apprenticeships at all educational levels, not just those in high school. Some of you are here because you're appointed by the President of the Senate. 4 of you are here because you're appointed by the Speaker of the House. 7 of you are designated by law. You represent various state agencies. 4 of you are also appointed by labor or represent labor interests. And 4 members, including the chair, were appointed by the governor, who represent a diverse range of employers with consideration given to including a minority contractor. And again, these folks are appointed by the governor. The chair was selected by the governor and the president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House. There are at least 7 tasks that the commission is responsible for doing to accomplish its goals. I'll go through those very quickly. The first is to identify the largest occupational sectors with current and projected skill shortages, and this relates again to the overall goal and purpose and focus of the commission. In information technology, healthcare, public service, manufacturing, and business services, examine the best practices of scaling registered apprenticeships used in other states and countries, examine industries that would benefit from creating and scaling registered apprenticeships, explore degree apprenticeships in fields requiring degrees, and engage members of the employer and labor communities to identify needs for registered apprenticeships career pathways. Examine existing registered apprenticeships in the state and how best to scale them with apprenticeships at the federal and other level in other states, and identify funding to expand registered apprenticeship pathways. Along with these 7 tasks, the commission is charged with making recommendations. Again, these relate to the goals mentioned earlier, such as reaching 60,000 apprentices by 2030, and having at least 45% of high school graduates in apprenticeships by 2031, strategies to achieve these goals, and in order to by recruiting new registered apprenticeship sponsors and apprentices for existing and registered apprenticeships and appropriate funding levels. You're also expected to have a report due to the General Assembly by December 1st, 2023. So in the 3 months remaining before December, we have to have a report done for presentation to the General Assembly, and that summarizes the legislation that establishes the 2030 commission. Also, I'd like to point out that it sunsets, the commission sunsets next year at the end of 2024. So this is you could view this as the start of a 2-year process.
Thank you, David. I'd like to now actually turn this over, and I'll do a quick, a little bit of a roll call here, and I'd like to sort of introduce our commission members, because we've got some great leaders and thought leaders around the table here. And I'll just do a little list down my list here on the roster. And when I call out your name, if you could give us a 1 or 2 sentence kind of background about yourself and your experience with apprenticeships, that'd be great. So I'll start with Senator Malcolm Augustine.
Thank you, Jacob. Senator Malcolm Augustine, Prince George's County. I've been a member of the Senate for the last 5 years. 4 of those years, I was on Senate Finance, where we had certain responsibility for economic development, and I've had a real interest in workforce development the entire time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Jim Rosenpep.
Hi, thanks everyone for joining. I think I know most of the folks who are on here for working with you over the years on these issues. I've been in the Senate longer than Senator Augustine, and I'm not going to say how long, but I represent Northern Prince George's County and Western Anne Arundel County. I also served on Finance Committee for a period of time and Education, working on these issues now on the Budget and Tax Committee.
Thank you. Senator Arthur Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, everyone. I represent Charles County, District 28 for the last 5 years in the Senate of Maryland. My first 4 years in the Senate was on the Education, Health, Environmental Affairs Committee, and now serve on the Finance Committee, and I look forward to working with everyone on this commission.
Senator Mary Beth Carozzo.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I'm excited to be part of the Apprenticeship 2030 Commission. Serve on the Senate Education, Energy, and Environment Committee. I'm a former delegate serving on appropriations, where we dealt with education issues as well. But more so, have been passionate about working with local employers, school personnel, and our students to expand technical and trades education. And really see this as an opportunity, especially with the workforce shortage. And just as an aside, this past weekend, I was working on placing a student in a welding program because they were short of instructors, but we managed to work out this young man's schedule so he would be able to take advantage of that program. But that's just one example of, I think, the task at hand.
Fantastic. Thank you, Senator. Delegate Eric Ebersol.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am a state delegate, have been for 8 or 9 years. Before that, I was a high school math teacher for over 35 years. So I bring a wealth of in the building experience, and I'm also currently chair of the Education Subcommittee of Ways and Means in the House of Delegates.
Thank you. Delegate Carl Anderton.
Had to check my watch. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carl Anderson. I'm blessed to represent Wycomico County in the Maryland House of Delegates. I'm also very blessed to serve on the Appropriations Committee. And the thing that intrigues me most about being on this commission with you fine people is that I'm probably someone who could have greatly benefited from this back when I was in high school. Probably one of the few members of the General Assembly who did not take the traditional route of going to college after high school. And this is something that I think would have made my life easier. So I'm hopeful that we can play a part in making someone else's life easier. So I'm just excited to be here with you all.
Thank you. Delegate Marlon Ampry. Delegate Chow Wu. You're on mute, Delegate.
Good afternoon, Chair. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Delegate Chow, representing Howard County and Montgomery County. I'm a freshman. Before this, I was on Howard County School Board. So I think Howard County has a strong apprenticeship and technical training, or we call it non-college career path. So I'm really looking forward to contribute to this commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Aaron Roth.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Erin Roth. I'm the Assistant Secretary for the Maryland Department of Labor with oversight of the Division of Workforce Development and Adult Learning, home to many things, including registered apprenticeship.
Thank you. Sarah Shepard.
Hi, Sarah Shepard. I am the Director of Education and Workforce at the Department of Commerce under the Strategic Industries in our Business Development Sector units.
Thank you. Richard Kincaid.
Hi, everyone. I'm Richard Kincaid. I'm representing State Superintendent Mohammed Chaudhry and the Maryland State Department of Education. In my role, I lead the Office of College and Career Pathways. I come to this role with 15 years of experience leading career and technical education programs in Texas and the District of Columbia and now in Maryland. And the work of supporting high school level apprenticeship programs falls within the purview of my team. So happy to be here.
Thank you. Brian Cavey.
Good afternoon, everyone, and a happy belated Labor Day. I'm Brian Cavey. I'm the chairman of the Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Council. I'm also vice president of the International Association Heat and Frost Insulators and Allied Workers. I've been a part of apprenticeship my entire adult life, from graduating an apprenticeship in my early years to then directing an apprenticeship at my local union and now chair of the state council. So I'm excited to be a part of the commission.
Thank you. Myra Norton. I don't know if Myra's able to join us today. Myra, I believe, is in Ireland today running a marathon. So she's our chair of the CTE committee. I'll move on to Patrick Moran.
Good afternoon. My name is Patrick Moran. I'm the president of APC Maryland. We represent state, county, and municipal employees across the state of Maryland.
Thank you. Kenya Campbell.
Good afternoon. My name is Kenya Campbell. I'm president of AFT Maryland. I come from education, educator, consultant, etc. Worked in the labor movement for a little over 20 some years. So I'm glad to be here as well.
Thank you. Greg Eckerman. Yep. Donna Edwards.
Good afternoon. Nice to see everybody. I'm president of the Maryland State and District of Columbia AFL-CIO, representing 350,000 union members. I've been a union leader for about 45 years, but I also worked for the state of Maryland for 23 years. And I was an LCSW at one time, and also chief of policy planning and research for the Department of DSS in Baltimore City.
Wonderful. Thank you. Avinet Blanding.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Avenette Blanding. I'm a CPA in business and industry and former chair of the Maryland Association of CPAs. Also participated in an internship program when I was in high school and college. So I understand the value of apprenticeships, internships, and I'm looking forward to providing support to the commission.
Wonderful. Terry Ford.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Terry Ford, and I serve as the president and CEO of Adventist Healthcare. We serve almost 1 million patients per year throughout the state of Maryland. I've been involved with mentorship and development programs my entire life, healthcare for 30 years, and just look forward to serving with each of you.
Thank you. And Tanya Terrell.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be here. I've spent about 17 years of my career in workforce development on a nonprofit side, a former EARN grantee, and also ran an adult literacy program that aligned to the Department of Labor. In my current role, I'm the Director of Corporate Community Impact at BGE and oversee our workforce development initiative, which is in its 8th year. It's a multi-generational program. So we have programs for middle schoolers, a high school internship program, which pipelines into permanent careers at the company. And then we also have a workforce program with Civic Works for work-ready adults. So look forward to being of service to this commission.
Wonderful. And Rachel Parker.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to meet many of you for the first time here today. I am here as the Executive Director of the Governor's Workforce Development Board and the designee of our board chair, Lou Dubin. For those of you who haven't worked with us before, the Governor's Workforce Development Board is essentially an independent business-led board established by federal law to really support the governor on strategy and policy around a range of workforce development issues and really ensure our system and services are truly business-led and helping support a competitive economy. And the blueprint added to the board, the CTE committee, and Myra is, sorry not to be missing today's meeting. We wish her luck on her marathon. I'm very impressed. And so our team here is staffing the CT committee's work under the blueprint as well. Before this, I spent 6 years at the National Governors Association, leading a team that provided support to governors on a range of issues, including apprenticeship for both youth and adults. So I'm just really thrilled to be jumping in just a few weeks in and supporting this work here in Maryland. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just highlight 2 more guests. Well, actually, one person is actually a member of our commission as well, Dr. Bob Lerman. Bob, do you want to introduce yourself? He's going to be doing quite a lot of work with us.
Well, I'm serving as a consultant, not a member, but I'm happy to join everyone. I've worked on apprenticeship for 30 years, writing about it mostly, but now at Urban Institute, we've been actually generating new apprenticeships and creating skill standards. And I've been a consultant to the CTE committee and working with State Senator Rosenpep and others on the Maryland initiative.
Wonderful. And we have a lot of people from the Department of Labor here today as well, but I also wanted to welcome Secretary Wu. Secretary Wu, if you want to introduce yourself as well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Great to see everyone. Portia Wu, Secretary of Labor. I guess I will just say that I was privileged when I was at Federal Department of Labor to oversee, a similar effort and, really supercharge and expand registered apprenticeship. So excited to bring that knowledge to this discussion. Of course, here to be a support to the commission and all our staff are as well.
Thank you. And with that, let's move to the next section of our commission meeting today, our first meeting, which is a briefing by the Maryland Department of Labor and to provide an overview of registered apprenticeship system in Maryland. And I believe it will be Secretary Wu and Director McClarion who will give us this overview. Over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'll turn it over to Chris. I do just want to add, what's super exciting about what we've been doing at the Maryland Department of Labor is we've already seen an exponential increase in the number of registered apprentices across the state. We've been working, but we know we can, we want the curve to keep going up, up, up. And that's part of the work of this commission. And we're delighted to support you and work with innovative leaders to figure out what some of those other strategies can be to not only increase our numbers, expand to new industries or emerging industries, and of course, work very closely with our colleagues in education to figure out how we can support young people and learners at all ages to get into this wonderful pathway of registered apprenticeship. So with that, I'll turn it over to our director, Chris McClarion, to talk in more detail about some of the work the department is doing, and really look forward to your feedback and thoughts about how we can partner together.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. And Mr. Chairman, I know there was a slideshow that was sent out. I didn't know if you wanted that live on the screen or if you just wanted me to roll through the slideshow on my own. I'm happy to do whichever is best for you.
Michael, what would you prefer?
I can take care of it for you now, Mr. McLaren, if that's okay with you, sir.
Thank you, sir. That would be great.
I will share my screen and get this up for you now. One moment, please.
So while we wait for the slideshow, Mr. Chairman, esteemed senators, delegates, and commission members, thank you for having me. Thank you for the honor to present to you today on the registered apprenticeship system in Maryland. As mentioned by Secretary Wu, I'll present on our work. I will also add that I'll be followed by Mr. Richard Kincaid from the Maryland State Department of Education. I will only glancingly go over the youth apprenticeship program in Maryland, as Mr. Kincaid will be covering many of those topics. If it would please you, Mr. Chair, you may wish to defer questions until after Mr. Kincaid's presentation, if they're going to also include youth apprenticeship topics, but I will certainly defer to however you wish to handle this. I will add last that I come to the Maryland Department of Labor after serving 3 years in the U.S. Army's 82nd Airborne. I then spent 16 years at the former Bethlehem Steel plant in Sparrows Point, where I was both a steel worker and a union representative. I only add that because when that plant went bankrupt, it's a good analogy for registered apprenticeship that those that were in the skilled trades, those that had gone through an apprenticeship program, more seamlessly re-enter the workforce after the collapse of Bethlehem Steel, while those of us that were production workers or non-apprentices had a much more difficult transition. And that might have a little bearing on where I present from today. Slide 2. So while he transitions the slide, I'll just give a very quick overview of registered apprenticeship and what it is for the audience, both for the commission as well as for those joining as observers. In its simplest form, registered apprenticeship is the nation's premier workforce training system. It allows employers from any industry who need skilled workers, regardless of occupation, to offer comprehensive, structured, and deliberately designed on-the-job training programs and education of the workforce. As the chair mentioned in the beginning, we're creating systems that both enable and empower, and that's exactly what registered apprenticeship is. All registered apprenticeship programs have 5 main components that we found in them regardless of the industry or the occupation, regardless of the state you're found in or the territory. First, businesses. Without business involvement, there cannot be a registered apprenticeship program, as the employers are the bedrock foundation of apprenticeship. All apprentices are employees from day one, and they're W-2 employees. They're hired directly by the employer. They're on the employer's payroll. They're under the direct control of the employer. The employers hire the apprentices, the employers pay the apprentices, and the employers commit to the on-the-job instruction for their apprentices. I will add here that employers have a variety of ways to participate in an apprenticeship program. They can design their own apprenticeship program just for their own individual employees. An example can be found with one of our commission members today, Ms. Blanding, who also is with Maryland Applied Physics, has an apprenticeship program for their employees right here in Baltimore City. An employer can also participate in a group joint apprenticeship program. This is a program developed for employers who are also bound with a union under union contract. And the employers work with the union to build a joint apprenticeship training committee, also known as a JATC. An example of this would be the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers and the National Electrical Contractors Association, who have some of the nation's largest and oldest apprenticeship programs in the country. Employers can also participate in a similar style program called a group non-joint apprenticeship program, which is essentially the same thing. It's a group of employers not represented by a union who build out an apprenticeship program on behalf of their employees. And an example of that would be the Associated Builders and Contractors right here in Baltimore. There's 4 chapters around the state that serve their members. And last, though they're also considered a non-joint program, I do want to mention that Maryland's community colleges have begun to answer the call for both non-traditional industries and occupations, and they become registered apprenticeship sponsors across the state. And currently 6 of our 16 community colleges are sponsors of their own programs. The next component, on-the-job instruction, also can be called on-the-job learning, OJL or OJT, and it makes up the second component of the registered apprenticeship system. This involves ensuring that all apprentices hired by the employers are receiving structured and deliberately designed training on the job. It's provided under the supervision and tutelage of a journey worker, also known as a mentor. Apprenticeship programs must last a minimum of 1 year and have at least 1 year's worth of structured competencies and job tasks built out throughout the program. Apprenticeships can last 1 to 5 years. And in order to ensure that the apprentice receives both the dedicated training and the safety considerations that go with that training, it is provided a 1-to-1 ratio, meaning one mentor to one apprentice throughout the apprenticeship program. This also helps to ensure that apprentices get the needed support to carry them through the program and to learn all the tasks as they go through it. The third component is the inclusion of related instruction, otherwise known as technical education or schooling for the program. The education can be provided in a myriad of ways in a host of locations. Education can be provided by a qualified instructor or instructors and can be provided by a joint apprenticeship and training committee, a union training school, a community college, or from an individual employer's qualified staff, or even from online instruction. The education must meet industry standards and should include all relevant technical education that, when combined with the on-the-job learning, helps to produce the highly skilled and educated apprentice upon their graduation. The fourth component, which is critical in the apprenticeship program, is the progressive wage scale. It's one of the key components that helps to ensure that businesses and is provided by businesses and separates programs such as internship from a registered apprenticeship program. As the apprentices gain in skills, proficiency, and knowledge, they will receive progressive wage increases as they go through the program. This helps ensure that the apprentice is rewarded in a defined, systematic way for their progression. It allows the employer to create a structured and equal system of pay for their apprentices as they advance. The fifth and final component is a national occupational credential. Registered apprenticeship programs are designed to meet the U.S. Department of Labor's Office of Apprenticeships regulatory requirements, along with any state requirements. The national credential earned is portable and allows a graduate of the program to cross state lines and to work anywhere. This is also accompanied by any local or state requirements for an occupation. For example, if a commercial driver's license is required for an occupation, it will be included and earned during the course of the apprenticeship. If a certification, such as baccalaureate certification, is required by an occupation, it will be included in the apprenticeship so the apprentice can advance to testing. Last, there are some occupations such as HVAC or electrical where the completion of an apprenticeship program in Maryland will result in the apprentice graduating with a journey worker license for the occupation without an examination needed. This tier of components carries with it a commitment that while the apprentice is agreeing to work for a lower wage in order to be fully trained, that the employer in turn will provide that necessary education and training to ensure that their apprentices will graduate at industry-leading wages, fully able to work anywhere on any job. We can go to the next slide. The apprenticeship program, the apprenticeship system in the United States is very structured, and it comes with it some governance ideas, some governance rules. In the United States, we have one massive apprenticeship system, but it can be viewed as two ways to administer or govern it. The system was born out of the National Apprenticeship Act of 1937, also known as the Fitzgerald Act. The first governance body, if you will, of the apprenticeship system is the United States Department of Labor's Office of Apprenticeship, or OA. The OA oversees the apprenticeship system on behalf of the country, but also directly oversees 26 states or territories that have chosen to have the Office of Apprenticeship manage their programs for their individual state. The second governance body is what is known as the State Apprenticeship Agency, or SAAs for short. SAAs are states who have received approval from the U.S. Department of Labor to administer, monitor, and manage all aspects of registered apprenticeship within their state. Maryland has been a state apprenticeship agency since 1962, and that actual designation of an SAA belongs to the Maryland Department of Labor's Division of Workforce Development and Adult Learning. As a state apprenticeship agency, our apprenticeship staff develops apprenticeship programs. We modernize, update apprenticeship programs. We provide technical assistance to them, and if and when needed, or if a program is no longer being operated correctly, or they're not operating in conformance with their standards of apprenticeship or the regulations, we take actions to cancel those programs. All those items are undertaken in a manner to ensure compliance with the U.S. Department of Labor's 29 CFR 29 and 30, as well as the required Code of Maryland regulations. Each of these items is not simply approved by our staff, though, despite their high level of skill. Instead, as a state apprenticeship agency, we present all items before the Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Council, also known as the MATC. The MATC is advisor to the Maryland Secretary of Labor. It is made up of 12 industry experts that come from the rank of employers, employer associations, the public, and from the ranks of organized labor. I'll briefly recognize, though he mentioned it earlier, that Commission Member Brian Cavey is the chair of our council, and he spent decades in the apprenticeship system prior to taking the role as the council chair. The MATC guides the growth of apprenticeship and helps to ensure high quality of all programs being operated. And last, we do have a Youth Apprenticeship Advisory Council that offers guidance on youth apprenticeships to ensure it is being operated in accordance with policy and also contains all required components. I'll be deferring to Richard for more on that during his presentation. We can advance the slide. The structure of the Maryland Apprenticeship Training Program you can see before you. I'll just touch on it briefly. And I'll note a couple things that might be of interest to the commission and the public at large. In 2016, the Maryland Apprenticeship and Training Program was transferred from the Division of Labor and Industry to the Division of Workforce Development and Adult Learning. This was done by design in a systematic way. It was meant to ensure that apprenticeship programs were now directly connected to the workforce development system. It was designed to facilitate closer relationship with Maryland's local workforce development areas, American job centers, and local education agencies or school systems. It was also done to help provide the support and structure the program would need to grow for our sponsors, apprentices, and employers. And this includes staffing. In 2016, there was 3.5 full-time staff devoted statewide to apprenticeship. That wasn't adequate, so we systematically began to grow apprenticeship by pursuing federal grants, leveraging state funding, and other leveraged funds. Since that time, we've added a significant number of staff, as you can see on your screen. It created the structure needed to not only sustain our required activities, but to continue to scale it. This has included hiring 2 workers from the Senior Community Service Employment Program, or CSEP. One of those employees was now a full-time administrative aide for the program, another who's a part-time administrative aide. We also have 2 full-time grant managers as required by the U.S. Department of Labor to monitor federal grants. And last, we took the step to ensure that we have a full-time expert to conduct monitoring of our apprenticeship programs. This was something that was being done by very few, if any, other states. And we started to do that to ensure that all of our programs have the technical assistance as well as the oversight and monitoring needed to ensure the high quality. This is now being emulated by numerous other states, as they also have their own compliance managers. Our team of program managers and navigators cover every region of our state and provide technical assistance on items ranging from youth apprenticeship to registered apprenticeship, from grants to tax credits, from GI Bill benefits to licensing, and they serve as a connection to business services, local workforce areas, school systems, and numerous other programs. Next slide. The Registered Apprenticeship Program in Maryland changes in size literally daily, but the number of apprentices, sponsors, and employers that you see before you serves as a good indicator of our sustainability, growth, and the expansion. I'll highlight a couple numbers before moving on to the next slide. As of August 31st of 2023, there was 11,302 active apprentices across earning and learning across Maryland. As you can see, the skilled trades or construction trades still make up the vast majority of our apprentices who are in those programs. And it should be noted there's a growing number of apprentices in automotive, healthcare, IT, and other non-traditional occupations, to include a soon-to-grow accounting program. This slide also represents that the 2022 and 2023 school year saw an all-time high for youth apprentices in Maryland, with over 600 youth participating while also pursuing their high school diploma. Particularly striking about this slide is that the majority of youth apprentices, in terms of the numbers per occupation, fall into non-traditional occupations. This has given employers the opportunity to participate in a structured system of employment with many similarities to a registered apprenticeship program. Last, you'll notice on the slide, there's some wage information. In partnership with the MLDS, or the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center, we were able to provide information about the impact of registered apprenticeship on those who graduate from our programs. MLDS data shows us that 5 years following the completion of a registered apprenticeship program, that the class of 2012 and 2013 had a median salary of $82,900. We go to the next slide. So registered apprenticeship is not only the premier workforce training system in our nation, if not in the world, but it's also an effective way for employers and sponsors to assess their workforce to determine if they're meeting their internal diversity, equity, and inclusion goals. Registered apprenticeship can also be used to advance their corporate social responsibility goals. Apprenticeship in its simplest forms allows employers to remove the barriers that might be blocking applicants who would otherwise make great employees from being hired. Apprenticeship reduces those entry requirements to only what is absolutely needed to become an apprentice and to begin their training. And typically what we see in apprenticeship programs in Maryland is the requirements are reduced down to a high school diploma and the ability to get to and from work or schooling reliably. We do have a growing subset of programs that will also waive the high school diploma in lieu of work experience or similar other experience. By doing this, the employers can engage entire new communities and populations who otherwise may not have known or been able to access these career positions. And this access occurs over a variety of pathways. For example, well over 50% of Maryland's apprentices are now participating in a union-based apprenticeship program. Over 40% participate in a program without a union affiliation. And apprentices are participating in the growing diversity of occupations, some of which I previously mentioned, but it ranges from electricians to auto mechanics, IT specialists to licensed practical nurses. And last, the demographics of the apprentices being registered in Maryland continues to expand in diversity. This increase of diversity the increase of apprentices who identify as being from a minority of population increased from 36% in 2016 to 45% this year. Likewise, the number of apprentices identifying as female increased. In fact, it doubled to 8% across the board. However, this is an area where we need to continue to focus because while we do have seen growth in the number of females as apprentices, the growth we have seen, as you can see here, simply hasn't been enough. Next slide. Earlier, I presented information about the components of a registered apprenticeship program. If we look deeper into the components and within the regulation, there are other requirements. One of the requirements is that an apprentice must be of age to begin their apprenticeship. This age is defined as being 16 or 17 with a guardian's approval and over 18 for all others. There is a component of apprentices within Maryland that fall into the age groups of 16 or 17 as they begin their apprenticeship program. This is separate from the youth apprenticeship program, and these apprentices are designated as school to apprenticeship apprentices, or otherwise known as simply STA. The STA designation comes from federal legislation from 1994 known as the School to Work Opportunities Act. This act was meant to help expand and integrate more structured opportunities for work-based learning to include registered apprenticeship into high schools. School to apprenticeship allows a high school student to be registered as an apprentice while still going through high school, with the apprentices beginning their related instruction provided directly by the school system, or if the curriculum does not exist, by the registered apprenticeship program themselves, just like any other apprentice over the age of 18. The apprentice would also then ideally work for the employer and begin to accumulate on-the-job learning hours while pursuing their high school diploma. There will be a small subset of STA apprentices that are only able to achieve the education while in high school, but upon graduation, they receive full credit for all education, and if applicable, any work hours from labs that can be transferred over. And if we can advance one slide. Maryland has used the school to apprenticeship pathway since 1994, albeit on a very small scale. Apprentices entering through the STA pathway have been dominated by the skilled trades, as you can see in the chart in front of you, but it has been utilized by other occupations over the years. Currently, our largest non-construction occupation is direct support professionals with 16 apprentices who began while in high school. By starting their apprenticeship program while in high school, apprentices can get a significant jump start towards the graduation, not just of high school, but of the apprenticeship program itself. They can accumulate up to 25% of their education of a 4-year program, which would reduce 4 years of class time down to 3 years once they graduate high school. They can also accumulate hours towards the first progressive pay increase prior to even graduating high school. This also allows high school students to explore meaningful career paths prior to making decisions on whether to pay for college, which they may wish or not wish to attend, thus accumulating debt they don't need to have. It also allows our students to begin that meaningful career path prior to graduation versus working for years in lower skilled positions that aren't offering a pathway to career wages. There has been a large number of apprentices that don't start their program until 23, 24, 25, 26, and 27. School to apprenticeship is one opportunity to reduce that gap between high school and beginning a formal apprenticeship program. Last, for our sponsors, employers, and potentially other interested businesses, this offers a chance to work closely with the school systems in your area. As you can see by the chart in front of you, the diversity of our STA apprentices is greater than that within our apprenticeship system itself. This is reflective of the diversity of our public school systems and offers employers an opportunity to ensure they're recruiting from their own community for positions within their business. We can go to the next slide.
Director McClary, can I ask you to potentially sort of wrap up so we can have some time for Q&A? I want to make sure we have some Q&A time in between the presentations. Thank you.
Sure. I'll skim through the next 2 slides and turn it back over to you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
I will just say you mentioned the growth of 60,000 apprentices by 2030. As you can see from the chart in front of you, our staff has worked tirelessly across the state to grow apprenticeship. We started with 7,340 apprentices in 2016 to expand it to over 12,000 in 2022. The last 25 months, 24 of the last 25 months has seen over 11,000 apprentices actively registered. We'll go to the next slide. The chair also mentioned, or I believe it was David mentioned, identifying funding and other opportunities. We've aggressively pursued within the division and within the department federal funding sources. You can see some of the opportunities in front of you where we've either leveraged other grant programs or we've applied directly for federal funding to include State Apprenticeship Expansions Act grants. I will note that we've obtained and been awarded over $18 million in grants since 2016, and you may have seen Governor Moore released this weekend that Maryland has received the most recent award of $6.6 million to expand apprenticeship, which will help to grow public sector apprenticeship programs as well as hospitality management programs. I will add here that any public programs we develop is in conjunction with the bargaining unit for those workers. In Maryland, it's the largest bargaining unit, of course, is APC Council 3. If we go to the last slide. Mr. Chair, we can leave this slide stand if you wish and go to Q&A, but basically, we do have a strategic plan to continue moving forward, to continue expanding apprenticeship, to continue ensuring debt-free pathways to careers for Maryland students and workers, also to ensure the path to economic prosperity for all by ensuring licensing and certification being included in programs, to work with our local school partners, as the Secretary mentioned before me, but also to increase the support for our programs to ensure high graduation rates and to have the highest quality programs within the country. Mr. Chair, I'll turn to you for questions.
Thank you, Director McClaren. Wonderful presentation and very comprehensive. I'll open up the floor if there are questions for this presentation. Senator Ellis.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Mr. Director. Good presentation. I appreciate it. And I'm looking at the chart where you list the different occupations, electricians and plumbers. I notice on that chart you don't have engineers. Now, I know the Department of Labor monitors the license of engineers, and there's like 3 different pathways for people to become a licensed engineer in Maryland. You can go to University of Maryland, for instance, or a college engineering program experience. Also, you have students come out of high school can work for a engineering company or government agency engineering, and after I think 10 years or so, they can take the test to become a licensed engineer in Maryland. So are those not apprenticeships also, or they're not registered, or it's a different pathway?
Sir, and that's a great question. There are 2 types of engineers: the Maryland Board for Professional Engineers, which I believe is what you're referring to. There's also the Stationary Engineers Board, which is separate, but it's also an engineering board. The Stationary Engineering Board does have registered apprenticeship programs for it. There's currently 2 in existence, and a 3rd one heading before the council in the month of September. For an occupation like professional engineering, if there is a bona fide requirement by licensure that must be done, for example, the education prior to beginning it, we would have to build the apprenticeship program to include it as licensing requires. But if it is not required, you can certainly build an apprenticeship program for engineers where the student becomes an apprentice and works while they're attending the University of Maryland or whichever school path is open to them. But we currently do not have any. No, sir.
I'm sorry, you say you currently don't have what? I didn't get that last part.
We do not have an apprenticeship program for professional engineers themselves, no.
Okay, so so the students who go from high school to work for engineering firm or organization, that's outside apprenticeship standards?
Looking really quick at the engineering requirements, an applicant qualifies under this section if the applicant has graduated from college or university with a 4-year curriculum in engineering or its equivalent, and subject to paragraph 2, has at least 4 years of work experience. Should we be able to combine that 4 years of work experience with that 4-year curriculum, it can certainly be developed. We just don't have any as of today.
Yeah, and so I don't want to take up too much time with this, but I'm really concerned about this. So if you could reach out to me with that, and I'll follow up with you with that, and we can have an offline discussion on, especially the high school part, where the high school students go into the apprenticeship program, and to see where they are. That is in the statistics that we keep.
Yes, sir, we'll do.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And now I'll go to Delegate Ebersol next, then Delegate Wu, and then Donna Edwards to kind of close out our Q&A session.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Ms. McClaren, for your presentation. On slide 8, you have a list of numbers of people that are in each area. There's the second column is canceled. I'd like to ask what that means, and assuming it might be what I think it is, what are the ramifications if a apprenticeship gets canceled, and what are some of the reasons they get canceled?
Sir, I suspect you're right in what your guess is, and the cancel column means apprentices that for some reason or another did not complete their program. It could be that they quit. It could be that they were terminated. It could be that they chose a different occupation. It could be, and we've seen answers ranging from, unfortunately, from not for high school students, but in apprenticeship in general, from joining the military, becoming incarcerated, joining another apprenticeship, moving out of state. We've even had some that list their reason of cancellation as joining missionary service. So there can be a host of reasons to why an apprentice is canceled. The ramifications for them are they can either begin a different apprenticeship program, or they simply quit and they've changed their mind about the industry and they move into a whole nother occupation altogether.
So they leave with having accumulated money from the job and some education, but
Yes, sir.
but it kind of stalls out for them at that point. Then is that the idea?
Yes, sir. Exactly.
Okay, thank you very much.
Delegate Wu, over to you.
Thank you. So if you go back 3 slides. Yeah, this one, right? So if I look numbers about youth apprenticeship and registered apprenticeship, and the 608 is around probably 5% of that 11,000, right? So are both numbers reasonable? What's our expectation here?
So the 608 is not a subset of the 11,302. The 608 minus the smaller number of school apprentices that I referenced in a separate slide. Most of those 608 are purely youth apprentices going through a youth apprenticeship program in their high school, which Mr. Kincaid will talk about shortly. And it is, as you said, about a 4 to 5% subset of the 11,000 overall. While that's been doubling our numbers every year for youth apprentices, it is still a small number overall for the state, yes.
So what's your expectation, like range of that number? Like a registered apprentice, do you want to like go to 50,000 or 100,000? Or for the youth one, you want to go to 10,000? What's your expectation there?
Well, for the registered apprenticeship programs, we heard, I believe it was by the chair we opened, was growing to 60,000 across the state. And 45% would be on the numbers that are coming out for the blueprint goals or for youth apprenticeship or high school level of apprenticeship in general.
Okay, thank you very much.
Donna Edwards, and then Tanya Terrell after that.
Okay, thank you. And I'm also looking at slide 5. My question is for the youth apprentice, are they paid at a normal rate, or when they are out on the job doing the same work and having the work experience, or are the employers or the partners employing the idea of 85% of wages? Because I know that our minimum wage law says that people under 18 can be paid 85%, must be paid 85% of the wage. So in general, what are their wages like? Are they equal to what the job would be, or are people paying them less?
Youth apprentices must be paid the state minimum wage without the exemption. They're not allowed to exercise the exemption to pay less than the state's minimum wage and use that 85% bracket that you referred to, Ms. Edwards. So while they may not be making the exact same as a registered apprentice necessarily, they will not be making below the state minimum wage, or if the county minimum wage is higher, that minimum wage subset.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Tanya?
Hi there. I'm sorry to backtrack here, Chairman, but can we go to that completion slide for youth apprenticeships? I have 2 questions. So school apprenticeships. So the first question is there a compatible slide around completions for the traditional apprenticeship programs for adults, for lack of a better word? And then number 2, over the course of this commission's work, do we have any intent to really understand what have been barriers or what has prohibited completion of a program, just so that we can understand where there might need to be some program improvements? So 2-part question.
Sure, and I'll start with the first part. Each registered apprenticeship program in the system is reviewed independently of the rest of them against the federal requirements for a review, which essentially means that if a program, for example, lasts 4 years, the apprentices have up to 5 years to complete it. The first 25% of the program is a probationary period where the apprentice or the employer can terminate the relationship essentially any time without dinging the completion percentage. So if you have 200 apprentices come in the program, 100 of them depart in the first year. We're looking at a 4-year apprenticeship program. Of the remaining 100, if they were all to graduate, you would essentially have a 100% completion rate. Mathematically, that's a 50% completion rate, but that's to allow for individuals to start a program where they realize, oh, I thought I wanted to be a plumber. I didn't realize plumbers dig holes all day. And they exit the program too soon. Now, in terms of the reasons for leaving the apprenticeship program, we do track those. They're not broken out by individual person, they're broken out by categories, but we can certainly supply that as well to both answers.
Well, in the interest of time, I'd like to move on to the next section of our presentations today, which is a briefing by the Department of Education on the overview of apprenticeship programs and the blueprint. And so I'm going to turn this over to Assistant Director Kincaid here.
Great, thank you very much. And just to confirm, our slide deck will be pulled up as well.
Yes, I will do that now for you, Mr. Kincaid. One moment, please, sir.
Awesome, thank you so much. As that's being pulled up, I do want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, commission members, and guests today. Bring greetings from State Superintendent Chaudhary. Joining me on today's presentation is Dr. Deanne Collins, our Deputy State Superintendent for the Office of Teaching and Learning, and also Phil Lasser, who is a Senior Executive Director in the Office of the State Superintendent. We appreciate the opportunity to present to you today. And that slide right there is actually perfect. So as the presentation outline suggests, today's presentation is comprehensive. While our delivery will be fast-paced, our hope is that you'll review the PowerPoint, including relevant links and data, after this meeting. As always, MSD will be happy to answer any questions after the presentation today or at some point in the future. Just reach out. We're happy to assist. Next slide, please. So let's begin by talking a little bit about apprenticeships and grant programs within MSD developed to support the implementation and scale of opportunities across the state. Next slide, please. Apprenticeships offer paid on-the-job training combined with classroom learning for skilled careers, ensuring apprenticeships and apprentices are well prepared for good jobs. In contrast to internships, apprenticeships typically last a longer period of time, usually about 1 to 3 years, have a structured training plan emphasizing high-demand skills, provide mentorship from experienced professionals, offer standard wages, and often result in an industry-recognized credential, including the industry-recognized credential of the apprenticeship, but also additional industry-recognized credentials aligned to the occupation. Next slide, please. So how is apprenticeship defined in Maryland? In the blueprint, it says by 2030, 45% of high school graduates will obtain an industry-recognized credential and/or complete the high school level of a registered apprenticeship program. Over the coming months, the CTE committee will collaborate with the Maryland Department of Labor, MSDE, and other partners to provide a clear definition of what exactly the high school level of a registered apprenticeship program means. One important element to highlight, given potential changes in apprenticeship program definitions, whether it's a youth apprenticeship model, a school to apprenticeship model, some of our local education agencies might need to revise their apprenticeship strategies and blueprint implementation plans. MSD has already communicated this out to our LEA partners, and we're ready to assist them throughout the entire process. Next slide, please. A couple of grants that are supporting apprenticeships from MSD that are currently live in the wild. We've introduced or redeveloped several key grant programs. First, the Maryland Works program is a competitive MSD grant. We utilized one-time American Rescue Plan ESSER funds coming out of pandemic. And the goal of Maryland Works is to develop apprenticeship systems aligned with Maryland's CTE programs in high demand employment sectors and to scale these systems statewide. The intentional integration of intermediaries into the grant program is key to sustainability and scale because we know that we need to partner with industries and partners that span all of our career clusters and occupations. Next, the Carl D. Perkins Formula and Reserve Grants provide federal funding to strengthen CTE programs across secondary and post-secondary institutions. Its application process was redefined this year to align with Maryland's apprenticeship objectives and industry credential goals. And then lastly, the CTE Innovation Grant aims to promote innovative CTE programs. For 2023 and 2024, priority is being given to applications focusing on apprenticeship scale and support, as well as integrating industry recognized credentials beyond the apprenticeship certificate. We believe that together, these grants represent MSD's commitment to advancing education and workforce readiness and the goals of the blueprint. Next slide, please. I'd like to give a moment just to highlight some of the Maryland Works grantees and the goals that have been provided. For example, Anne Arundel County Public Schools and Montgomery County Public Schools in their application are focusing on the development of centralized support systems to remove barriers to entry, providing new apprenticeship opportunities to a projected 1,700 students. Next slide, please. In addition, Prince George's County Public Schools plans on expanding their school to work model, one that you just heard Chris talking about, which will scale infrastructure supports and creating opportunity for 800 students. Additionally, one of the 3 intermediary grant recipients, the Institute for American Apprenticeships, will implement non-traditional apprenticeships in finance, HR, cybersecurity, and initially by 2025, they plan to implement 100 apprenticeship programs. Also want to highlight that IAA's approach to innovative course offerings as well is a key component of the services that they are providing. Next slide, please. So as a result of the Maryland Works program, MSD projects projects the awarded LEAs will generate more than 3,000 new apprenticeship opportunities and result in the addition of over 400 new business partners over the 2-year grant performance period. Effectively, what this means is that Maryland Works would increase apprenticeship opportunities to 30 times the current number of participating students, which we consider to be an extraordinary win. Next slide, please. So now I want to dive a little bit deeper into apprenticeship programs across the state. Next slide. So many of you are perhaps familiar with the history of apprenticeship programs in Maryland. About 8 years ago, House Bill 942 established a pilot program for youth apprenticeships, which was the precursor to 2018's Apprenticeship Maryland program. It's what you heard Chris talk a little bit about. It's our AMP program. This was the first permanent statewide CTE program of study dedicated entirely to apprenticeships. As of spring 2023, with the help of multiple partner organizations that we've listed on this slide, all 24 county public school systems across the state of Maryland now offer the Apprenticeship Maryland program of study. Details of the AMP program are available on the next slide. So a little bit about youth apprenticeships in Maryland, which currently, as you saw the data on Chris's slide, amount to the majority of apprenticeships that are currently being operationalized. Youth apprentices under the AMP program undergo structured training in high-demand fields mentored by industry professionals. They commit to at least 450 hours of work, typically spanning the summer, usually post-junior year throughout their senior year, and are then complemented by classroom instruction tailored by their employers. This is the primary model used in secondary schools across the state at the current time. An important note to highlight from the labor presentation: students can be dually enrolled in the AMP Youth Apprenticeship Program and a school to apprenticeship model. They're not mutually exclusive. Next slide, please. In case you're wondering how an employer can become registered to sponsor an apprenticeship program, 4 very quick and easy steps outlined on the slide. Feel free to visit the link that's on this slide if you would like to register for an apprenticeship, or you know a friend or neighbor who also would like to register. Very simple process. Next slide, please. As noted earlier, the CTE committee was established to help oversee the successful implementation of several initiatives, including the planning, implementation, and scaling of apprenticeship programs. MSD and the CT committee meet weekly to coordinate on strategy, planning, and communication for this programmatic rollout. As you might imagine, it's a huge task, and it takes all of us with coordinated communication and effort to make sure that we roll this out in the best way, in the way that our kids deserve. Next slide, please. Our specific goal within the blueprint states that by the 2030-31 school year, 45% of high school graduates need to complete the high school level of a registered apprenticeship or an industry recognized occupational credential. If current student enrollments remain the same over the next 8 years, we'll need at least 26,037 registered apprenticeships annually for our students to participate in prior to their graduation. Delegate Wu, I hope that answers directly your question on the number. Next slide, please. So some data over the past 6 school years shows the progress that's been made related to the number of students participating in the apprenticeship and the number of employers providing apprenticeship opportunities. So as you can see, as Chris had alluded to, we've incrementally made progress over the past 6 years, certainly not anywhere close to where we need to be, but it does show progress as we've been focusing more and more on this system. Next slide, please. So this slide details the number of apprenticeships by county school system. Quick shout out to Washington County Public Schools for continuing to lead the way on apprenticeship opportunities for their students. As I had mentioned, as of the end of this spring, all 24 school systems across the state now offer Apprenticeship Maryland programming. Garrett and Somerset were the 2 schools to implement this past spring. And so while currently listed as 0, we have high hopes for the apprenticeships that they'll be offering over the coming years. Next slide, please. And finally, this table details the number of apprenticeships by industry sector. One important item to note, for the first time, apprenticeship growth in non-traditional industries, so government and education specifically, is outpacing traditional apprenticeships in the trade. So one important highlight that we wanted to notate here, clearly more communication needs to be happening within these non-traditional fields, but we're making some good early progress towards that goal. Next slide, please. So now I want to share a couple of quick student schedules. These are live schedules from actual students to show some of the innovative approaches that have been taken by our LEAs. Next slide, please. But before I do that, I want to show how 2 LEAs have approached scheduling, but need to detail a few items that are sort of prerequisites to this sort of innovative design before we launch into that. As a state, Maryland needs policies that support LEAs to be creative and strategic at scale in order to maximize students' apprenticeship opportunities while finishing high school. The state board and MSD are committed to ensuring this policy landscape exists. At the LEA level, some possible innovations could and should include altering the length of the course. So for example, taking a 1-year course, semesterizing it so that it becomes 1 credit in 1 semester, offering virtual courses either synchronously or asynchronously, scheduling courses outside of the normal school day, which also leads into that coordination with community colleges to be able to offer high school graduation required courses at the community college. And then finally, for some of our LEAs that perhaps are struggling with identifying businesses and employers outside of the school system, we would also encourage them to consider hiring apprentices within the school system. So within graphics and printing or operations, a school system is essentially a village, right? With a number of jobs that span a number of career areas. So that's the sort of guidance that we're providing to our school systems. Next slide, please. So there are 2 examples I want to provide. The first is in Washington County. Apprentices are offered flexible scheduling to accommodate their work schedules and employer needs. There are 3 schedules they can choose from. Next slide.
Director Kincaid, can I ask you to probably wrap it up in the next 2 minutes or so?
You got it.
Thank you.
Yep. So in Howard County, there are 3 schedules that they can choose. And this is an area where they partner with the community college in order to provide those graduation requirements outside of the normal school day. Next slide, please. You can actually skip to the next slide. So we want to highlight two students in particular. The first is Jeremiah. This is important because he was Baltimore City's first youth apprentice, was just hired full-time with Efficiency Enterprises in May of 2023. And so we're really excited about his trajectory and being hired into industry. Next slide. And then Suzanne is a student that graduated from Frederick County back in 2016. And the amazing success story of her is she remained employed part-time while she was in college at West Virginia University of West Virginia. And then upon graduating college, became a management team member of Insultech and opened their first branch in West Virginia. So really cool how students can have that sort of experience once they graduate. And then finally, let's go to slide 28. We'll wrap up on this one. So a couple of next steps in order to meet goals within Blueprint. Ultimately, and hopefully you've heard already in this call, it's going to take all of us working together to support this work at scale. So MSD, Labor, AIB, CT Committee, our local school systems, community colleges, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say intermediaries, all have to be involved in the process. The final thought that I want to leave you with is, and a prerequisite to success is ensuring that employers provide enough apprenticeship opportunities for high school students across the state. LEAs can have all of the innovative schedules in the world, but if there aren't enough apprenticeship slots with businesses, then the schedules won't matter. And so it's going to take all of us to build that capacity statewide.
Thank you. And with that, we'll open up questions. I'm going to kind of keep this a little bit abbreviated, so we'll have a 5-minute Q&A session here, and we'll go to Senator Carrozza and then Donna Edwards and then Senator Ellis.
Thank
Senator
you, Mr. Chair. I appreciate that. And I wanted to go right to, I thought some of the information at the very end when we were looking at the areas, government and education at the top, as opposed to the non-traditional careers that a lot of us are focused on. And two, I wanted to hear from the Maryland Department of Education what the interaction has been in not only working with the local school systems, but with the employers to make sure that we're making it attractive for employers to offer the apprenticeships. And you know, I heard at the very end of the presentation, kind of putting the onus on, you know, we need the employers to provide the apprenticeships, but I also wanted to hear from the Department of Education, what are we doing to work with the employers to encourage them and to assist them in setting up these apprenticeships?
So it's a wonderful question, Senator. Thank you for asking it. So there are a lot of moving parts when we are having these conversations with employers and school systems alike. And a lot of the work happens at the LEA level. And so many of our LEAs have apprenticeship support folks. They work on the CTE team. They're doing local outreach to their workforce development boards, local employers that have supported CTE programming over, you know, a number of years to bring their business in-house and to provide these opportunities for students. And that works. It has been successful. You can see the numbers have grown pretty substantially over time. When we go from that 608 number all the way to the 26,000 number, though, this is where it really creates that coordinated effort that I was speaking to within the presentation. And so it's having clear and consistent messaging with our friends at Labor, with Chris and his team and Aaron, to make sure that as they're engaging employers through this process, there's a nice seamless way to connect those employers to the school system and vice versa, so that we're able to get those opportunities. Additionally, you know, I feel like I'm not the only one in the room that would agree to this statement, that in order for us to scale in the ways that we need to scale, it's not these one-off conversations that are going to get us there. It's onboarding intermediaries across the state that span multiple career clusters and areas, so that they are able across sectors to connect our students with apprenticeships regardless of industry. That's really how this is going to scale. That really is the purpose of the funding of those 3 intermediaries through Maryland Works, and is a strategy that I think we really need to double down on in order to make the goals by 2030, which we will.
Thank you. Donna, did you ask were you able to ask your question?
Yeah, no, I'd like to. I have a lot of questions about the intermediaries, but I'm going to save that because Richard, what I find is the numbers aren't, I need to see more numbers. Are we saying that 608 students start the apprenticeships and continue and graduate? Or what is the fall off? How much is the percentage of those who start and they cancel out? Secondly, so the number of students actually completing, the number of students that actually get a job with the employer that they are apprenticing with. That's an important thing for us to follow, because we don't want to have employers that then are just doing apprenticeships with students getting $1,000 bonus, paying, minimum wage, and then getting more students the next time. Because if that's why we're paying intermediaries, it seems to me that because we come from the gold standard, that you work, you come, you get your education through the unions. We have a partnership with the contractors and the businesses, and they take on the graduates. So this is saying that we're creating an entire new industry of apprentice intermediaries that are making money off of people trying to find work. So that's something I do want to look at, but I think the numbers need to be there of, where are the students going? How long are they staying? What employers are doing with them? And I would also like to see a chart of wages, exact wages. What are the students making when they are working this year off?
Yes, and those are excellent questions. On the data pieces, you're exactly right. That sort of information, as we move forward, will be critical to looking at the health of the system, right? You can start an apprenticeship program, but if you're not moving into the industry, and in particular, perhaps with that employer, then we need to figure out sort of how to make that a seamless transition after graduation. So I completely agree on the data. Some of that we can circle back and see what we already have available, and I'm happy to report back. But at this time, I don't know exactly what we have available in regards to that longevity that you're looking for.
Okay, I'll be glad to put it in writing. Thank you.
Thank you, Donna. In the interest of time, we'll allow for 3 more questions. We'll do them like speed round style. So let's try to keep the questions and answers less than a minute. So we'll go to Senator Ellis, Delegate Ebersol, and Senator Augustine, and we'll cut it there. So Senator Ellis, speed round.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So if you could go back, Mr. Kincaid, to 19, I believe that's a map of Maryland where they have the numbers. Oh, no, not that one.
17.
That was 17? Okay, wrong end. Okay. Yeah, so these are the number of apprentices per county.
Yes, sir. So as of June 30th last year by county.
Yeah, so I'm curious about, say, like I represent Charles County, most of Charles County. So say Charles with 1 apprentice versus say Mary's with 41. So what is the reason, based on your estimation, for that disparity in those numbers right there? And if you go up to a larger county, Prince George, the same, question, like
yeah, I mean, so with each one of these, there are any number of variables that determine sort of that number, right? So first of all, not all of these onboarded at the same time. And so you would expect in some of our counties that have been going since maybe 2016, you would expect larger numbers because it's a mature system. It's sort of like with schools and anything else, right? It depends on the coordinator. It depends on how they're communicating to local businesses. It's depending on student schedules and how quickly those school systems are sort of thinking through innovative approaches. And so, these are the sort of numbers that we look at initially to calibrate and set a baseline. And then looking at sort of all of those things, time of implementation, we can then hone in and provide specific strategies and assistance to the local school systems that, are at risk of lagging behind.
Okay, so you will reach out to those who might be lagging behind to encourage them to catch up, so to speak.
Of course. So we already do that. And then also through their implementation plans for Blueprint, a number of items around their strategies for growing apprenticeship programs were included in that first round. And so it's those sort of things that we'll continue to review and provide support around.
Thank you.
Delegate Delegate Ebersol, you're next. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Kincaid, for your presentation. Going to slide 20, where we look at reimagining student schedules under possible innovations. The second sort of dash there refers to offering virtual courses synchronously or asynchronously. This is going to be a focus for me because we saw evidence during the pandemic that virtual courses have to be handled very delicately to be effective, especially asynchronous instruction. Where there's also a virtual schools bill that was passed this year, and I believe we'll have to give some attention to that. So it's not a question, it's more of a comment. And with that, Mr. Chair, unless there's something that Mr. Kincaid would like to offer on that, I'll stand down.
Thank you. Well, let me go ahead and turn it on to Senator Augustine here.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Kincaid, for your presentation. I would be very interested in the programs that the different LEAs have that feed into their CTE programs that are approaching what would be these apprenticeships, but may not be official in the way that you are calculating them, just to see that, to see sort of what we currently have as a pipeline that is going to be potentially there versus sort of like what you right now have currently defined as being it, so that we have a little bit of a clearer picture. I know that there's a significant amount of work that's happening inside of these LEAs around CTE that doesn't show up right now in what you're presenting.
No, I appreciate that that comment, and you're exactly right. So over the course of the next 2 semesters, there will be some significant changes that are happening within the system. Part of that is reliant on how the CT committee defines the apprenticeship and the industry credential, because that then allows us to think about whether or not the current programs are going to be well aligned to that particular system. And so this really becomes a foundational piece of our check-ins every week, so that we get to that place where we can properly support and also build a system that's in line with what those requirements and recommendations are. But noted, and I appreciate the question.
Thank you. Evan, I am so sorry, but I think we need to move on to the next section in the interest of time. If you wanted to kind of send me your question, we can kind of take that offline, or I'll get that answered for you. And so let's move forward. Next section here is really a briefing by Dr. Robert Lerman. He is an Institute Fellow at the Center of Labor, Human Services and Population within the Urban Institute. Dr. Lerman, turn it over to you.
Thank you. Yes, I have a set of slides, I believe you. Okay, thank you, Michael. I'm going to go through a lot of them very quickly because you've already been hearing, but I want to highlight a few points in some of these slides. So let's go to the first one. So here, Chris and others have already described what apprenticeship is, but the one thing that I like to highlight, this comes in later with regard to the gains for employers, is that people often call it an earn and learn model, but I call it an earn, learn, and produce model, because apprentices are contributing to production. And one of the ways that it can be a win-win for employers and apprentices is that from day one, apprentices are doing work that you'd have to hire someone else to do. So some of that investment is recouped by the employer. Next slide. So here, we're all here because this is a great time to try to scale our apprenticeship system, not only in Maryland, but nationally. And I think a big part of it is the recognition that apprenticeship is about learning, but it's recognized that the learning can take place best outside the school environment for many. And the increase in student engagement is really quite profound. Just to give you a feeling for where we could potentially get, Swiss system has about 70% of its 16, 17, 18-year-olds going through the apprenticeship system. That's 70%. And but by the age of 25, they almost all but 5% have some real direction, either a BA, actually they have a lower BA rate than we do, and or have gone through an apprenticeship. Next slide. So I'm going to look at what we know about the US system. I won't talk much about the structure because that's already been mentioned by Chris. Some research on the effects on apprentices, effects on employers, and how we can, what are some of the efforts to expand, looking more broadly beyond Maryland. So the next slide, please. So we've seen in the US an increase in the absolute number of apprentices from about 200,000 in 1948 to about 500,000 civilian apprentices and another 110,000 in the US military apprenticeship program in 2022. But interestingly, the percentage of the workforce that are in apprentices has stayed about the same at about 0.3%. Now, what we have not done is done much research on apprenticeship, and I welcome Donna's comments about follow-up and others, because we haven't had the funding for real research on apprenticeship. But there may be as many unregistered apprentices as there are registered apprentices. And therefore, one of the options may be to try to convert some of the unregistered programs into apprenticeships. In the UK, they copyright the word apprenticeship. You just can't call anything an apprenticeship. But here, that's not the case. And an employer can call almost anything they do an apprenticeship. But many of them are real and serious apprenticeships, even though they're not registered. Next slide, please. So again, we do have this complex system, and Chris has talked about the different agencies that have been providing apprenticeships as a state agency. Oftentimes, the states vary quite a bit in how strict they are, how long they take to get an apprenticeship registered. And so we see very wide divergences across states in their apprenticeship scale. Just to give you a nice example, New York, a very large state, only has about the same number of apprentices as Indiana, a small state where I happen to be from. So there's a lot of variation in what's going on at the state level, and a lot of potential growth there that we can do. Let's also recall that up until 2015, the budget, the entire federal budget for apprenticeship was about $30 million. And then beginning at late in the Obama administration, we created the American Apprenticeship Initiative, which funded 45 grantees with 175 million. And since then, the amounts have grown, but still it's relatively small comparative to other countries. Next slide, please. So this is the data on civilian apprentices as a percent of the US workforce. And as I pointed out, it's now at about 0.3%, so well under 1%. Next slide. But apprenticeship does thrive elsewhere. And, you know, the Central European countries have had a long tradition of apprenticeship, but a number of other countries have expanded their programs as well. the traditional countries do have an emphasis on starting in late high school. They tend to start at age 16, 17, 18. The off-job learning is in the school system. And one of the benefits of the school to apprenticeship model that we always mention is that the off-job learning component, a lot of it can be done within high schools. And that's how these other governments support apprenticeship, because the employer does not have to fund the off-job learning when it's done in high school, because high school is an entitlement there as well. They all have national skill standards that allow for smooth paths to apprenticeship, and often they have paths to BAs as well. Intermediaries play a large role in all of these countries and oversee employer apprenticeships, and all have public service apprenticeships. Next slide. So you can see where the US is down toward the bottom. And this gives us a kind of benchmark that can get toward the 60,000, the 56, 60,000 figure that we're shooting for in Maryland. It would be to move toward the level, for example, the percentage, for example, in the UK. So 0.3%, we've got a long way to go. Next slide, please. Again, this is material that we've already talked about. I do want to highlight a key point about apprenticeships, and that is the sense of pride that apprentices gain when they complete. Some of you may have been, especially in the construction field, to graduation ceremonies. It's a sense of great pride when apprentices know that they've gained a high level of expertise in a particular occupation. Sometimes we talk about earnings gains and no debt and so on, but I think occupational pride is a great part of the apprenticeship model. And unlike other education and training programs, apprentices experience little or no lost foregone earnings. When you're going to college, one of the big costs that is not often mentioned is the lost earnings that you could have made while you're spending time in college. Well, with apprentices, you're earning as you produce and learn. The other point about that I mentioned toward the bottom is that while the employers are training the apprentices to achieve high levels in particular occupation, they're doing it in the context of the employer's organization. And every employer has to have some startup learning orientation in their own organization. And so that's valuable when the employer trains an apprentice and keeps that apprentice for themselves. Chris mentioned a point which illustrates this bottom point, that apprentices retain most of what they learned for decades. And a lot of times people criticize apprenticeships as being too focused, saying, well, people will move from job to job. Mostly they stay in related occupations, even when they do move. And we've surveyed apprentices to ask them how much of that apprenticeship do they still utilize on the job, and the vast majority use quite a bit. Next slide.
Dr. Lerman, can I ask you to wrap it up in the next 2 minutes or so?
Sure.
Thank you.
So I'll go through, this is some data from the evaluation of the American Apprenticeship Initiative. This shows the earnings gains relative to cohorts that started who are similar. And you can see the much steeper earnings gains for men and women in apprenticeships. Next slide. Especially high for new workers, but there are also good earnings gains for existing workers. Next slide. This is key that we, as Mr. Kincaid mentioned, and everyone knows, you need to have an employer for an apprenticeship. And it does represent a substantial investment for employers. But most recoup their apprenticeship investments during the apprenticeship. And for a good apprenticeship, it's very important that the apprentices are doing work at the very beginning. We've got some results on how employers benefit from the apprenticeships, and we can share that with you later. Next slide. And this is sort of an illustration. At the beginning, the wage is more than the cost, but as the apprenticeship learns steeply, there's a steep learning curve. And at that point, the employer is able to recoup some of the benefits from the apprenticeship. Next slide. These are some of the gains that we've seen and the share of firms that are at least break even during the apprenticeship. You can see the numbers there, but broadly speaking, a high share of employers in this American Apprenticeship Initiative did at least break even or do better. Next slide. Well, next slide. Keep going. One more slide. So one of the ways that apprenticeship can be scaled is to offer a kind of pay for performance initiative to mobilize intermediaries to scale apprenticeship. So far, we've been doing individual grants, one-off grants. I think we need to have more of an entitlement kind of effort that offers financial incentives to the intermediaries, because it's very hard work to go out and reach out to employers, get them to change their hiring practices and to adopt apprentices. We've seen evidence that this can work, and the next slide kind of illustrates that. Next slide, please. So here you can see that these green dots are in the range of 5,000 per apprentice. These were grantees under the American Apprenticeship Initiative. And that's what we'd be aiming to do, to embody that and not pay for those intermediaries who have very high costs by providing it more on the basis of how well they do, rather than some grant for the promises that they may deliver. So I'll end there and try to keep it short, Jake.
Thank you, Dr. Lerman. We'll open it now to some questions. Senator Carrozza?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two questions. One may be for our consultant, but the other one, Mr. Chair, may be more for you, just because I see that you'll be addressing us at the end. When we talk about, putting the apprenticeships together, it seems like everybody who's a member of this understands the value of the apprenticeships. And then you get into what I call I guess we were just getting into the intermediaries, and I'd like to better understand that, and maybe we'll go in the future more detail.
Yeah.
Because it took me a while to put together. I was trying to link a couple of contractors that wanted to do an apprenticeship with the the community college and with the school systems. And it took, I personally got involved just to try to get everybody talking to each other to get it done, but there has to be an easier way. So wanted to better understand that. And two, Mr. Chair, this is probably for you, for those of us who know our districts pretty well and know that it's a little bit hit or miss with apprenticeships, depending, you know, what industry it is and what geographic area it might be. You know, is it, would we be able to get some support either through the commission or working with the commission, or maybe doing it on our own to kind of gather in our own districts how, you know, what we can bring to the table with good suggestions from the field of how, whether it's employers or school personnel, that they have good suggestions on how to improve our current apprenticeships in Maryland.
Yes, thank you, Senator. And I'll get into that in this final section. But you know, we will have an opportunity to potentially form some working groups from this commission to actually address specifically some of those areas, whether it's geography or industry groups. But I'll talk a little bit about that in the next section. Senator Rizapep?
But
oh, sorry, Bob. I didn't.
Yeah. So quickly, in the UK, there are about 1,200 training organizations that go out and work with employers on creating programs. Australia has an intermediary model, which also generates employer apprenticeships. And the US Department of Labor has provided individual grants to what they call industry intermediaries and other kinds of youth apprenticeship intermediaries. The main problem is that you have to spend a lot of time, several meetings, working things out with employers to persuade them to give apprenticeship a real try. But this is a one-time investment, because once you get an employer started on apprenticeship, they tend to continue. Now, state agencies, including Maryland's, you do have apprenticeship training representatives that can go part of the way. But if you really want to scale the system, you're going to need to engage with large numbers of employers. And one way to do that is to encourage intermediaries to do that and to provide subsidies for it. But it's a one-time investment rather than an ongoing.
Senator Roosevelt? Oh, you're on mute, Jim.
There we go. There we go. Okay. Well, thank you. First of all, Mr. Chairman, members of the commission, thank you for your leadership and engagement on this. It sounds really hard to get from where we are to where we want to be. The good news is it's reflected in the members of the commission, but also the other people who are watching this, frankly, who are very interested in this. 10 years ago, we would never be able to do this. But because of what's happened over the past decade, beginning as Bob Lehrman said, with some initiatives during the Obama administration, continued by the Trump administration, in Maryland, led by the Hogan administration, continued and amplified by the Moore administration, with bipartisan support in both houses of the legislature, and now with a whole variety of unions and employers who weren't thinking about apprenticeships. And obviously, the building trades, very well established, very well successful in the United States. But now we have employers and unions in IT, in healthcare, in education, in all kinds of areas that are looking at doing this. And so I would just say that I think we're off to a good start. The presentations today were terrific. And I think if we keep our eye on the ball, Mr. Chairman, as you said at the beginning, we know the what, we're about the how. And the how is why we put together this commission. And so I appreciate everybody's participation and help.
Thank you, Senator. I want to turn it over to Donna.
Sorry, I muted myself, but Mr. Chair, I do appreciate the way that you keep us on time, but I would like to have a request that we spend some significant time on really talking about intermediaries and their role and how we see this. Over the decade, as Jim has said, as the senator has said, yes, other people have gotten involved in apprenticeships. Let me be clear that all our unions have been doing apprenticeships since the 1930s and in all sectors. IAM does a terrific job in engineering and IT and NASA engineers, et cetera. So I could go on and on. I appreciate what other countries are doing. I also need to say that other countries do sectorial union bargaining, and they also, Switzerland is 25% organized, Canada is 30% organized. About half of Germany's employees are represented by collective bargaining. So we really can't compare apples to apples sometimes when we make broad statements. I would, like I said, if we've got a major role for intermediaries to play at making a profit, at connecting people with jobs and apprenticeships, I want to hear more about how they do that. Because in the material that you sent to us, I read it and I saw where, intermediaries get paid by the employers after 60 days. But in the presentation, we see a lot of fall off of apprenticeships way before, 60 days or even half of a year. So I really want to look at data so that Maryland gets this right, because Maryland can do it. And we're here to help you do it right. And we're part of this. But we don't want to just scale up something because we put a number out there. We need to really have a structure and a process that means real jobs at the end of somebody's training or graduation. We want real jobs in Maryland. And a real job in Maryland means you got to be making about 60K, which is what union apprenticeships make. So please give us more time to talk about intermediaries, and just because we thought you build it and they come, because we're told that all these industries need workers and that's why we passed the bills for apprenticeships. But now we're told that somebody has to go beg businesses to take on apprenticeships. So that's where the disconnect for me is. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Donna. And I think that's, well, if we jump a little ahead to sort of one of my recommendations after this, as we start thinking about these working groups, intermediaries is one area that I think we should have a working group to take a deeper look. And I absolutely appreciate that, when we look at sort of apprenticeships, we really should be looking at the unions, right? I think the unions have done a terrific job building up a framework that works. Question now is how do we learn and grow from that and expand that? Let me turn to Nick, final question. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I would like more information for this pay for performance type things, because here with the union apprenticeship programs that I represent, we already have a great model where our union members, pay for the training for any apprentice that's coming through. And we also work together with the employers to make sure that any apprentice coming through is being trained properly and it's not costing, that apprentice any money. So I'm more curious to hear more about this pay for performance. It seems like it's a get rich scheme for our intermediaries.
And Aaron, final question. Yeah.
Maybe just a comment in reaction to the last two comments. I'd like to see us focus on like sustainability too. So once, the grant funds go away, the employer in this model really needs to have some strong ownership, right? And I think we can look at the skilled trades and how they've built this model over time very successfully in our state and in the country. And part of that model is that the employees then contribute to the model over time. And so I think looking at how that's done in the trades and potentially applying that logic, like that sustainability model to other industries is going to be really important too. Because we have some pay for performance grant programs that we're administering now, and what I think about is like what happens when those go away, whether it's a grant on the front end or a grant on the back end. So thank you.
Thank you. And with that, let's move to the final section here, which is really I'm going to sort of provide a few kind of just closing comments or just wrapping up, just to kind of synthesize some of this. And actually, Michael seems to don't have screen sharing on my side, or Michael, you want to put mine
I
up?
will give you permission to screen share here. One moment, please. Okay, Mr. Chair. Are you still there?
I'm still here.
See if there's a button at the bottom of your screen that says share screen.
There is, but it doesn't, it still says host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Okay, let me change that for you. One moment, please. Okay. Learning this as I go. I apologize, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Okay, try now.
All right. People see my screen here?
I see it, Mr. Chair.
All right, one sec here. Let me put this into presentation mode. Sorry, I'm gonna jump right back. All right. Look, I think, I just want to kind of wrap up a little bit, right, and just synthesize some of the conversations, right? And look, I think from, really when we start thinking about the vision of success, a lot of this has really been talked about, the what and the law, right? We've already kind of pointed out here, 60,000 registered apprenticeships by 2030. I think in particular, when we're talking about youth apprenticeships, right? 45% of high school graduates having completed a high school level registered apprenticeship by 2031. And once we start thinking about these things, right, I think one of the key questions is going to be, right, how do we actually have education and workforce be better aligned, right? And how do we create more fluidity and interoperability between those worlds? From an industry standpoint, I also want to raise the point here that, this is not just about, apprenticeships in terms of, be able to create pathways to work, wages, and wealth, which is obviously the first priority. But this is also, quite frankly, an economic development opportunity for us, right? When we start to be able to build robust talent pipelines for companies or organizations to be able to build their long-term workforces in Maryland, this becomes an opportunity for us to be able to create opportunities for workforce, as well as be able to create place-based work investments into underinvested communities. So I wanted to zoom out a little bit to kind of just to highlight some of the, this is a much bigger than just simply jobs. It's actually a much bigger competitive advantage for our state, and hopefully become a model for the rest of the country. But I think visions and can be very energizing, but I also wanted to kind of highlight some reality checks here. And I think that a lot of the conversations today, I think a lot of the members here on the commission have already seen a lot of these models play out. And I'll just highlight 3 reality checks here, right, of different systems that we've seen kind of try to emerge in different states or different areas that really haven't scaled, right? I think the first one really is what I'd call the kind of degrees and certifications driven pathways, right? Theory of change, I think since the 70s and 80s, college is a guaranteed gateway to high paying middle-class job. That was since updated to kind of think about boot camps and certifications and online learning and other micro-credentials. And I think we've all seen, right, the result, and the data has shown, right, we have low completion rates, we have soaring debt, we have underemployment and widening socioeconomic gaps, right? Again, these are things that have been tried, and how do we build on them, right? The purpose of this commission, again, is focused on how, and we want to get beyond surface level stuff, right? We want to get down, right, a couple of levels, right, so that we actually can build on these best practices. I'll call the sort of the second reality check here is, well, I'll go third reality. Third reality, employers need to provide the pathways, right, and invest in workforce. Here you sort of theory of change, right? Skills-based hiring is going to take off once employers can publish the skills that they need, right? You also have this theory that industry needs to work together, provide pathways to be good corporate citizens. And what you end up with, again, is like you have lack of scale. You have DIY. It's very expensive, right, for employers to put together these talent pipelines. You got unpredictable results, and typically these programs end up getting stuck in what I call CSR, in a CSR sandbox. So when we kind of look ahead, I just wanted to highlight here. What's going on here? What are some game changers that we can think about, right? Just to kind of focus some of the conversations, right? First, I think is really how do we activate employer demand, right? And I think a key question here, right, is apprenticeships have to be a better option than recruiting from the open market, right? This can't be simply, hey, do the right thing. This is an economic or commercial conversation for organizations, for employers. So it's got to be a better than the existing alternative, which is today poaching and recruiting from the open market. And I think this was a key question that's come up that we're going to dig into a lot more, is like when we think about the infrastructure, how do we enable apprenticeships for employers? Again, it's been very costly for most employers to do this, to assemble these pipelines themselves. And so that's the world of intermediaries. And so how do we think about that world? How do we shape it? And how do we create a fair system for creating this infrastructure for employers? I think a second game changer is really creating a much more interoperable education and workforce systems. And I'd say two principles here is, I think first, we got to address the skills gap and the experience gap, right? It's RTI and on the job. And I'd also point out here is there needs to be a lot more agility and fluidity between these systems, right? So for example, today, we have one initiative kicking off in the blueprint for Maryland's future around skills and creating inventory of skills and bringing industry together in terms of an interoperable skills record. At the same time, through apprenticeships, we also see industry groups, right, coming up with competency frameworks. How do we create a lot more interoperability, fluidity between those worlds? And finally, I'd say the last one game changer here is, I'd say, it's a little bit more of a mindset, right? Is that we need to think longitudinally and intergenerationally about this, right? In the sense that the investments and the things that we do here on this commission are going to impact families for generations to come, right? I'm a first generation immigrant, and I know that the things that were provided for my parents really paved the way for my sister and I to be able to get ahead of the queue in academic and professional areas, right? So I don't think that the impact can be measured in a short time basis. This is really a long-term investment in our future. And with that, I'd also say that we should be focusing on recipes for success versus prescriptions. And when I say that, is that, recipes are meant to be mixed and remixed and customized, right? There isn't a one-size-fits-all model here, right? It can't be a prescription that we provide that applies to everybody. And so I'm looking forward on this commission to be able to work with the fellow commission members to, again, focus on the how, not the what. I want to also point out apprenticeships are for everyone. This is not about quote unquote low performing kids, right? It's really a model that's really around building the future workforce that addresses all of our stakeholders as we think about the future of Maryland. So far today, the first meeting has been great. We've had evidence-based discussions. We talk a lot about data and wanting to see more data. I want to also point out all viewpoints here are valued. In fact, one of the goals, I think, of why this commission has so many great stakeholders and thought leaders is that we can get a wide perspective on different views. I hope that we can continue to hopefully seek alignment early and often. Right. So we'll talk a lot about stakeholder incentives and making sure that we can cover that together, whether it's in the commission meetings or in the different work groups that we might be self-assembling into. And finally, and this is important, right, is that we don't want to take stuff away from current success. And I'll mention this as particular for unions and trades and guilds. There's a lot to learn from the success that's come before, right? And so I hope that what we do, we can have the mindset to really learn and scale together and really ultimately share the joy together. Because again, there's a lot of best practices, a lot of things that we can learn together here. With that, two housekeeping items to close out our conversation here today. I think first is, you've heard me mention earlier, we have a lot of ground to cover. This is a 2-year commission. But I think for, to be able to and we have a report due at the end of this year, December 1st, I think, although we might try to move that data out a few weeks at least. But, what I'd like to propose is to create a group of work groups that can meet potentially offline. Some of it may be for now just to collect and get the research and what's available out there. But I hope by year 2, we're going to get even more substantive recommendations coming from different work groups. And so one of the things that I'll sort of reach out to the commission members for after this meeting is to really see if there are volunteers for people who want to sub-chair or lead work groups. Some of the ones that have already been talked about, as I've had different offline conversations with different commission members, have been things like CTE interoperability, intermediaries, which has come up many times in this conversation today. Subcommittee on fiscal and program costs. How do we make this sustainable over time? Employer demand and engagement. And finally, there's a need for industry work groups, right? And so I know there's lots of great industries being represented here. We'd love to see people raise their hand to be able to share what's happening in different industries. I'd also mention that in order for us to kind of, there's a lot of material, and I know we've sent out a lot of reports prior to this meeting. But what we'll do is I'm also going to reach out to sort of see if there are some quote unquote primers or introductions or fireside chats that members of the commission might be able to send us. They probably cannot be live meetings because these are public hearings, but what we probably do is send out some videos, send out some primers for people to be able to get up to speed on what's happening around the world of apprenticeships before the next meeting. And with that, let me also probably turn this back over to David here to talk about the future meetings, because we have some future ones already scheduled. And so, David, let me turn that back over to you.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chair. Just for your information, for the commission members' information, and you all are aware of this, we have 2 more meetings, official meetings scheduled for the commission. The next meeting is going to be October 3rd, and we're developing an agenda now as we speak to what you'll be getting that shortly. Also, that meeting will be virtual. The final scheduled meeting is going to be November 8th, and it's planned to be an in-person meeting. So plan to be down here in Annapolis on November 8th in the Economic Matters Committee hearing room, which is in the House office building. And at least one of the things you'll be doing at that meeting is hearing from taking public testimony. And again, an agenda, a future agenda for that meeting is also going to be developed, and you'll be getting that information shortly. So that's where we are at right now. At least 2 more scheduled meetings at this interim before we have to start working on a report. And one is going to be virtual on October 3rd, and the final one, or at least the second scheduled meeting, is going to be November 8th in the Economic Matters Committee hearing room, and that will be in person.
Thank you. And I know we started this meeting 3 minutes late, so I'll leave 3 minutes open for anybody who might have any final comments or questions that they might want to raise with the commission here. If not, we'll end this on time at 3 o'clock today. So I want to thank you all again for joining this first meeting. And this was a terrific kickoff, and I'm looking forward to working closely with everybody. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
All right.